the company eventually wound up, and they get liquidated overnight. And listen, I understand how business works, and I understand that if you get liquidated or a company becomes insolvent, listen, you just get your 2 weeks redundancy and that's it. But I mean, the perpetrator in this case is the state, and you have your own reasons for doing it, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have done it, but I'm just saying you did do it, and I do think you have an obligation to actually look after these people. These people have no hope of paying property tax, the same as an awful lot of other people in Ireland. And I mean, I think you need to take another look at it, given that you know, normally if a business in Ireland goes out of business and liquidator comes in and he becomes the controller of the business and he makes the decisions as he sees fit and follows the rules and regulations that persist. And that's the way it is, and we have to take it on the chin. But in this case, the parent company of IBRC is actually the government. So the government is actually continuing to trade. So I do believe that your obligation needs to be addressed there. But I mean, these are just some of the people. I definitely think that at least for 60% of the people of Ireland, maybe more, are going to struggle to pay this property tax. Now, there's a massive, the fact that so many people are in a difficult place. What's still going on with the banks is difficult to take. It is so unfair. I mean, this morning I only read in the paper that the Royal Bank of Scotland, just in England, I mean, what's happening here is actually happening in other countries in Europe. I'm not saying that things are particular to here, because we well know that we're living in a globalised world now, and the philosophy has been implemented here, are being implemented in other areas as well. Are you serious? My God. Right. Royal Bank of Scotland lost 34 billion since 2008. Last year alone, in 2012, they lost 5 billion, and they paid out bonuses last year of 679 million. Now, I mean, a company loses 5 billion, right, and they pay out bonuses of 679 million? I mean, come on. In Spain, Bankia issued figures yesterday where they lost 19 billion last year. 19 billion euros they lost. The others are pounds. And I just read in the Financial Times there last week where Spain's finance minister, Luis de Guindos, says he doesn't expect a single Spanish bank to close down. This is despite the fact that the banks are insolvent. Now, and likewise, Minister, you know, we were arguing here yesterday evening about it. There's no limit to what we can do for banks. And you may say that they are vital to the national interest and this, that and that, but I don't know how anyone in this day and age can say that AIB and Bank of Ireland have been vital to our interest, given that they've been closed for the last 4 years. And it's just about impossible to get money out of them still. But I mean, I think this is a huge problem for the people, that we're having to impose a house tax on people who can't afford to pay it, are in a very difficult place, just really struggling to pay their household bills. Over half the population, €50 left after paying their household bills each month, and we think they can pay a house tax now. And yet they're just looking, they're reading the papers, looking at television and seeing what's happening with the banks still. And it is mind-boggling. And I pointed out before, right, but the gap between the top 10% and the bottom 10% in the developed world in earnings has been multiplied by 14 times in the last 25 years. It's becoming unsustainable. And expecting the ordinary people to pick up the can to suit this philosophy, to be honest, I don't think it's going to continue. I really don't. I'm over time. That was the fastest 10 minutes of my life. Thank you.
Fine. Let's go.
And God knows you have some ones.
Boiled eggs.
Thank you, Laskin. I rise, Laskin, to
Speak on this bill almost, I feel like, for the second time. And I'm aware of the need and the reasons why the Minister's introduced this bill in order to give some alleviation to worthy causes of the property tax. But while I think everybody in the House supports what he's doing for the disabled and for charities and others, I think the and for pyrite, I think that the main clauses of the bill still stand, indicted by most members of this House, and I include in that, of course, those who sit behind him. One of the extraordinary exercises in listening to this bill has been the political contortions of Fine Gael, who managed to produce an enormous number of speakers, all of whom seem to be vehemently against the tax, and then walk into the lobbies in favour of it. And that's something, it's a kind of new democratic experience here. And it's one which we can, sorry, I can't hear the minister, would you like to interrupt? But it's one which the tax has provoked. And I think the problem is this. The problem is that many members of the minister's side recognise that this is a fundamentally flawed tax in itself, but it's also utterly, as Deputy Mitchell said earlier again today, and I hate to use her as a thorn in the side of the minister, but as Deputy Mitchell said today, it is utterly wrong at this time, although she's fundamentally in favour of it. And the problem is this: it's very, very difficult to get money out of an asset which is yielding nothing. And in many cases, it is actually impossible, because you can't, in the present market conditions, you can't sell a house, or you can. If you can, you sell at rock bottom prices. And there are people caught and going to be caught by this tax who simply haven't got any money, and they've got an asset, and you're looking to get money out of an asset which doesn't yield anything. That simply doesn't make sense in present time, in the present circumstances. But the other reason why I think it's inappropriate, and I understand the pressure the minister came under about this, is because property itself is the commodity which is, above all other, caused the financial crisis that we're in. Property is that commodity. It is massively volatile in terms of price. It is hugely unpredictable. And you are certain to have social disruption if you start taxing something in that category where people can't actually extract liquidity from. And property continues to be a major problem and an unpredictable problem and an unpredictable commodity in terms of price. And that's why, above all, we have so many anomalies and complaints about the situation here, and so many groups of people who say quite rightly that it's unfair, because the price of their house and the condition which they're in has changed so much. I'm talking about the financial and social condition which they're in, has changed so much during this period, due simply to one thing and one asset, and that's commodity, and on the whole, it's that home in which they live. Their circumstances have changed so much due to this property, the change in property prices, that it's inappropriate to start taxing it. Now, what the government did was not recognize this. It said, oh, this is a commodity which is out there. It's broadening the tax base, whatever that means. I don't think it is. We'll tax it. But you can't really do that because there's no consistency attached to the kind of valuations that we're making. And I think the minister knows, and anybody involved in the property business knows, it's actually impossible to accurately value houses at the moment. The market, if it's there, is moving far too fast. There's very little consistency in it. And in many cases, in fact, you just can't sell a house. And in theory, at least, they are worth virtually nothing. If you can't sell something, it's not really worth an awful lot. And you certainly can't raise the liquidity from it in order to pay this tax. The other problem, which this is going to exacerbate, is also deeply property related, and that's the mortgage problem, the problem of mortgage arrears. And the minister will be aware, and indeed he's spoken about it himself, that the problem, as has the governor of the central bank very eloquently, the problem of mortgage arrears is one which we have not solved, and to which at the moment there is no obvious solution. We get a huge amount of, a great volume of suggested solutions, the personal insolvency bills, all sorts of suggestions that the banks are now going to get powers to repossess, which will make an even larger problem in the property market. And I think it's something which is worth addressing, because if the banks are going to start repossessing properties in this year, which I gather they are due to new legislation about to come to this House, we're going to have an even bigger property problem. because we're going to have properties on the more properties on the market, forced on the market, which will bring the price of properties down. But the property tax will affect mortgages in this way. And I'd be interested in the Minister's view on this, because it is a prediction, and it is one which I think makes sense. People who can't pay the property tax, of which in the Minister's speech he acknowledges there are people who are going to get into serious difficulties, and people who refuse to return their forms as a result and refuse to pay anything as a result, and who cannot who will find that the penalties and the solutions which are suggested by the revenue commissioners, in other words, to take money out of their pay or confiscate money from their pay, will be faced with a dilemma. What are they going to do about the gap in their wages, with the money that has been confiscated from their wages? What are they going to do about the fact that the revenue commissioners have made an attachment order against their bank accounts? What are they going to do if they're on social welfare and the money is taken out of their social welfare? I know what they're going to do, and I'm sure the Minister knows what they're going to do. They're going to not pay their mortgages. That's what they're going to do. It's so obvious. It's the only option left open to them. And in the present circumstances, where I think it's 140,000 people are not paying their mortgage or in arrears of one sort, there is some sort of safety in those numbers. And one of the consequences of the crisis, I don't blame the government for this, I blame the banks, but of the financial crisis we're in, is that people regard mortgages now as an optional extra.
2 minutes from please.
And what will happen will be, when they get their property tax, which after all will be substantial next year, even if it's not as substantial this year, they'll say, yeah, it's gone out of my wages, I've had to pay it, I didn't want to, but I've no option. Okay, I won't pay my mortgage. And the problem will come around the other way, and we'll get more problems in mortgage arrears. It's sticking out a mile to me that will happen. And I don't know what we're going to do about that, because it's a kind of circular movement, and one way or the other, the same people are going to be hit. I think there is a real problem too, and I heard Deputy O'Donoghue refer to it in his speech. I was at the PAC as well the other day when the head of the Revenue Commissioners came in. And she was very eloquent and very engaging and very enlightening. But by God, she was scary. She was frightening, Minister, because she put the fear of God into us on that committee when she told us what she was going to do to us, right? She told us that the revenue commissioners were going to be utterly and totally ruthless about collecting this tax. And the damage that will do, of course, to the revenue commissioners, it will portray them again as confiscators, as tyrants, as people who attach to your bank account, who take money if you can't pay it willy-nilly because they're acting under the instructions of the minister. I think it is damaging to the whole tax collection system if you have to use enforcers of this sort with such extraordinary draconian powers. And finally, I can see you're just about to interrupt me, I'd like to address an issue close to your heart, so that the people of Dublin South, which you won't interrupt me for, I'm sure. Right, the people of Dublin South
20 seconds.
and of 30 seconds, and of Dublin South East, and of other areas of Dublin, deeply resent this tax. And the reason they resent this tax is only one of the anomalies, apart from negative equity and all the others. It's because they will have to pay more for a similar or identical type house than will be paid by people outside Dublin. That is not fair, and the minister's refusal to make concessions on that, which has been well represented by people behind him, is something which I deeply regret.
Thank you very much.
And I know you regret it too, Laskin.
I call now on Deputy Dominic Hannigan, and I understand you're sharing time with Deputies Dowds and Terence Flanagan, and the indicated times are 5 minutes, 5 minutes and 10 minutes. Is that
That's
right?
correct, Laskin Corda. and thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on this bill today. All exemptions of the bill are very useful and they're needed, and so they're welcomed, particularly those that are related to the new personal insolvency bill. It's important that we continue to remember how difficult it is for people out there on the ground at the moment. We do need to continue to work to get the country's finances right, and I'm pleased to see that the importance of the debate is recognised by Minister Noonan, who's in attendance in the House. Today, in my contribution, I want to focus on the issue of pyrite and the pyrite exemption contained within the bill. And I know other speakers have spoken about it already this morning, but it is an issue that is very important for very many families across the North East region. It's an issue I've been raising with various ministers since we came into government in 2011, but it's also an issue that was raised by myself and others in the previous, in the Shannon from 2007 onwards. When the property tax was announced a few months ago, myself, the Pirate Action Group and many TDs from across all of the benches in the House called for an exemption to be made for those families who have got pyrite in their homes. So I very much welcome, Minister, the fact that you listened and that this is being put in place. And I know from speaking to homeowners that this exemption will help them somewhat as they try to deal with having the consequences of pyrite in their homes. But Minister, now that we've agreed the exemption, we need to do some further work to agree how we actually apply that. As I understand it, homeowners will need to get their homes certified by the National Standards Authority of Ireland to show the level of pyrite in their homes. The authority has previously announced new standards that it's going to use to check how much pyrite is in somebody's house, and I think they're then going to provide a certificate to people to say so. If the testing shows that the amount of pyrite is over a certain level, then the homeowners are going to be able to notify revenue, and with their certificate they'll then become exempt from the tax. It's going to be up to the Minister for the Environment, your colleague, to show how the testing will work and also to set the levels. And that's going to be done once the amendment bill has been passed. But right now, we don't know what those levels are going to be, and people out there are still concerned. We do need to do work on this issue as soon as possible. Families are very anxious about this. They're waiting for the information, and this is, as you know, just one part of the solution. The other part of the solution that is being worked on is the Pyrite Resolution Board, and I've been told by your colleague, Minister Hogan, that Mr John O'Connor, the former chair of An Bord Pleanála, has been appointed to chair the Pyrite Resolution Board. I think that's great, and now that a chairman has been appointed, we can expect to see further movement. I think it's important that myself, other TDs on both sides of the House continue to put pressure on the Minister so that the Pyrite Resolution Board is up and running and has got all its members in place as soon as possible.
2 minutes remaining, Deputy.
And I won't need all of that. Thank you. I'll ask Chair Corder, so I'll conclude now. Just to say that on behalf of people with pyrite in their homes, we very much welcome this exemption. We think it's very positive, but we haven't seen the end of the story yet. We do need to get the Pyrite Resolution Board up, running. We need people to get their certificates, and we need to clear up the whole issue about how we make restitution to people who are currently in difficulties with pyrite in their homes.
Thank you very much. Deputy Dowds.
I welcome this amending bill to the property tax because it improves several aspects of the original bill which came before the House before Christmas. Obviously, one of those is the fact that all local authority houses will be valued at the base rate, which will save people living in urban local authority housing hundreds of euros each year. The reductions in liability where there's been a grant given to adapt a property for use by a disabled person, and the provisions preventing the undervaluation of the chargeable value by somebody who intends to sell the property. And I also welcome the deferrals for those in excessive financial hardship, such as those who have to avail of the Personal Insolvency Act. And Minister, I would appeal to you to look at this aspect of the operation of the bill very carefully as it comes into effect, because I think we may see anomalies where people are severely squeezed, and in that situation I think it's important that we return to the table to look at this again. There are three main arguments in favour of property tax. The first being it's fairer than many forms of indirect taxation, such as VAT, and generally speaking, it falls more heavily on the wealthy. Secondly, it's a regular and stable source of funding for local authorities, and that's why most of the world has property tax in some form or other. And thirdly, it's jobs friendly in that it doesn't directly affect the labour market in any way. I want to address two particular issues with this tax. Although in general it falls more heavily on the wealthy, there are clearly going to be hardship cases such as pensioners living in valuable properties. And actually, as an aside to Deputy Ross's contribution earlier, where he was saying that the price of property has gone through the floor, in a sense that's almost an argument in favour of property tax because of the fact that people will actually be valuing their properties a lot lower than they would have been if they were valuing them 5 years ago. Coming back to my main remarks, despite local authorities having the power to vary the tax by plus or minus 15%, which will come into effect in 2015, this tax will fall more heavily on urban dwellers than on rural dwellers. I'm concerned that people in low to middle incomes in urban areas such as my own will be overburdened by this tax as it's currently designed. Families in my own constituency will be paying far more tax than families in equivalent situations in other parts of the country. And I believe it's important that hard-working people in low incomes living in urban areas are not unfairly hit by this tax. And this is another area where I would ask the Minister to carefully look at people's ability to cope with it as it's rolled out. While there's an argument in favour of urban dwellers paying more in that they get more in the way of services than do rural dwellers, the counter-argument is that local services in rural areas such as roads, for example, cost a great deal more to provide than they do in urban areas. So there is a balance to be got. I'm not quite sure that we have it just at the moment. So when we consider these 2 points together, that urban dwellers are being asked to pay far more in tax than rural dwellers, yet providing local services in rural areas is far more expensive than in urban areas, there's a strong argument that local authorities should have the ability to vary the charge to a greater extent than 15%. This would help ease the burden on low-income or urban dwellers, and I believe this would help to provide greater balance between urban and rural areas and provide the necessary income to provide services where they're needed. Related to this point is the issue which hasn't yet been decided upon, a very important one, namely the percentage of the amount collected which goes back to the local authority from where the money has been collected. I am aware of the 65% suggestion that goes back, with 35% going into a central pot to be divided up amongst the rest of the country. And my fear is this runs counter to the argument that it is a local property tax if a great deal of it is going out away from the county directly. In my view, the figure should be something in the area of 80%. And some redistribution of money collected in urban areas to rural areas is justifiable, as urban people do use rural resources. However, if very large chunks of this money is not going to local services, then it flies in the face of being a local property tax. In relation to the concept of local property tax being a good source of income for local authorities, I firmly support the granting of powers to local authorities to vary the rate by 15% from January 2015. And Minister, in the long term, I think it would be a good idea to look towards a situation where local authorities have even more power in relation to deciding on the amount of local property tax. Finally, and this is a really important point, we live in a situation where, because of our traditions and our attitude to property, there are many people, unfortunately, in this country who deeply dislike property tax. And we know that Fianna Fáil signed up to this one, and that Sinn Féin imposes very high property taxes in Northern Ireland. And they're both, in their different ways, playing on this issue with huge hypocrisy. But in my view, in the long run, the only way that property tax will stick is if people see it as fair. I know, Minister, you're in tune with this point. In fact, we wouldn't be sitting here today if you weren't. For that reason, I would urge you to review the Act's operation at the end of 2013, almost finished, Chair, with a view to ironing out inequities. And lastly, could I just make 2 quick points? First of all, I know and I hope that the situation of paying it will be much easier and that it can be spread over the year to the greatest extent possible. And I think there's also a need to let people know exactly how the money is being spent. Thank you.
Deputy Terence Flanagan, 9.5 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I welcome the opportunity to contribute to the Local Property Tax Amendment Bill 2013 and just wish to acknowledge the presence here of the Minister for Finance, who's been here for the full debate. I think that's very much welcomed by members that you're here to listen and to take on board the issues that are raised. This government obviously is introducing the local property tax, as the previous speaker said, because of a commitment in the Troika deal, which was entered in by the previous Fianna Fáil-led government. And this is an alternative, obviously, than introducing increased income taxes, which would obviously set back the employment situation. And this is, I think, seen as to broaden, obviously, the tax base and to generate income of approximately £500 million each year. And I think, obviously, if there hadn't been a property tax in the first place, we may not be in this position that we're actually in at this moment in time. Obviously, there is new exemptions being included in this bill. I'm happy with that various concerns raised by deputies back in December have been taken on board by the Minister. I very much, in particular, welcome the amendment exempting those homes which are affected by pyrite damage. Eligible and qualifying homes will be eligible of a waiver for at least 3 years, and we know that when the finance bill was published after December, after the budget, and that it did not contain any specific reference regarding property tax for homes with pyrite. I'm happy now, obviously, that this matter has been addressed, because there are a lot of concern there among homeowners with damaged homes. And I have indeed seen at first hand the negative impact that pyrite has done to homeowners. I agree, obviously, that they shouldn't be liable for property tax. The issue of pyrite in housing has brought a lot of unnecessary stress, anxiety. It has put a lot of pressure on families through no fault of their own, and who made the largest investment of their life find themselves in this very difficult situation. This is on top, obviously, of the other difficulties, such as the negative equity and the mortgage arrears that some homeowners find them in. And Section 3 does cover the exemption for a period of at least 3 years for those homes who have a significant level of pyrite-induced damage. Section 10A outlines that Minister Hogan will draw up the regulations for testing properties to establish the level of pyrite damage sustained and whether a house has been impacted by a significant level of pyrite damage. And there is an unresolved issue around this, Minister, and that's the whole area of the testing of the homes and the cost that's involved in the testing. It is contained in the pyrite report that was produced. That a generic test would be introduced and one that will be kept low, but we need to ensure that this happens as soon as possible, that people get an opportunity and that the test be cheap and that it be efficient as well. The Pyrite panel has conducted a thorough review of the extent of the problem in Ireland. It's estimated that around 12,000 homes could be affected, and possibly more, and I think we'll find out the full extent of the situation when people do contact the Revenue Commissioners in the coming months regarding their own particular circumstances. We know that 1,000 of these homes already have been fixed up and remediated. There's clearly a need for more progress to be made in this area. Further progress is still needed to deal with the testing issue and the categorisation of homes, and hopefully that will be carried out quickly and efficiently in the coming months. I'm concerned as well, though, by reports that insurance companies are discriminating against homeowners who've had their homes remediated. And that's a point that my colleague there, Deputy Alan Farrell, has raised, who has a huge interest in this area. And homes where pyrite has been removed from properties, insurance companies should certainly not be discriminating against those homeowners. I'm aware, obviously, that the Minister has no role in this specific area, but I hope that, and sincerely hope that the Financial Service Ombudsman will investigate this issue and ensure that homeowners are not presented with further obstacles once their homes have been repaired. With regards to the collection of the local property tax, it is imperative, obviously, that a clear auditing system is in place to ensure that the money collected from an area is ring-fenced for the local authority servicing that particular area, and it is spent on improving local services and amenities for those people who are paying their taxes locally. Of concerns indeed, Cathaoirleach, in my own constituency, with Fingal County Council, which represents a portion of my constituency, which manages that it doesn't have the funds at times to undertake essential footpath and road repairs or even tree maintenance. And I fully understand the concerns of constituents that have paid the household charge when this work is turned down by the local authority. And some constituents have obviously come to me and stated that once they pay their property tax, they want to see the benefit of that in their own particularly local area. And I think it's crucial, obviously, to get full buy-in from the people that they see the difference that the local property tax does make on the ground in their own constituency. I think we need to know, obviously, it's unclear at the moment as to how much of the tax revenue will go directly to the local authority in the area in which it is collected, and how much of it will be allocated to the local government fund and distributed to other areas. So perhaps the Minister could touch on that point when he gets the opportunity. Residents, certainly in Dublin, more than anywhere else, would have major concerns about that, because naturally they're paying a lot more in property tax. And it's only right that taxes paid on Dublin properties remain in Dublin to improve the communities which they are paying for. I mean, aware as well in this bill that local authorities have the power to increase or decrease the level of property tax in their own particular area, and I think it's important that councillors have these powers to decide and to make local government that bit more relevant. And if local authorities wish to vary the basic rate to plus or minus 15%, they will have to provide an estimate of the authority's income and expenditure for the period and the financial position of the authority, and an estimation of the financial effect of varying the different tax rate. And I think that if various councils were asked to provide a yearly statement to the Department of the Environment or to the necessary department as to how that monies are being spent for the local property tax, I think that would help.
2 minutes remaining.
Would help the accountability issues and regarding this issue. Also welcome that there is a deferral there for those people who are administering a deceased person's estate. A constituent has raised that issue with me, that the person was an executor of a will charged with selling a house and distributing the money, and to decide as to who stood to inherit the different monies. But that person found themselves in a difficult position in having to pay the household charge and the non-principal private residence charge on the property up front, and they had to use their own monies in order to foot these bills. With this new bill, there will be a deferral option of up to 3 years will be now available to allow the administration of the estate without causing unnecessary cash flow problems for the executor. I'm glad as well that obviously people who've entered into insolvency arrangements, which are very serious arrangements that individuals find themselves in, that they will also have a deferral option. Also that those, as previous speakers said, that those who may find themselves in unnecessary excessive hardship cases, by paying the property tax, will now have a deferral option also. I think also for anyone, particularly for the incapacitated individuals, I think that deferral, that exemption very much is worthwhile and very important, and also the ones for voluntary organisations and charitable organisations such as the Boy Scouts, Girl Guides, organisations that have a very low income base, that they will be exempt from this. And in conclusion, obviously local authority tenants, they are being included, and I think in general, people, the more people involved in paying this tax, the less burden on those who are actually paying. And that was one of the criticisms of the household charge, that local authority homes were not being charged, and they are being included, obviously, in this case. And new homes that are purchased in the next 4 years will be exempt from this property tax. So, in conclusion, just very much welcome this bill. Ciarán.
Thank you very much, Deputy. Deputy Barry Cowan, I understand you're sharing time with Deputy Patrick Nulty. 10 minutes each, is that right? Thank you.
Thank you, Ciarán. This debate is the debate that should have taken place after the budget. That debate was shut down by government. And why was it shut down? Because government could not have a light shone on the fact that their own TDs, particularly Fine Gael TDs from Dublin, reminding them that they had campaigned the last election saying that property taxes were unfair. But because of the usual anomalies in Rush legislation, like gaps identified in the IBRC liquidation process, which has shown that the only bondholders being burned are credit union bondholders and local authority bondholders vis-à-vis unfinished estates. See, it is now necessary to legislate for just causes as identified in the amendments. And I want to again, for the purpose of those who have spoken earlier, reiterate our position in this matter. Yes, on negotiation of the funding provision from the Troika, we did acknowledge that the tax base needed to be widened. We did acknowledge that we had an over-reliance on property-related taxes. And we did commit to the prospect of a site value residential property tax. And what's more, we acknowledged that when we campaigned that this was quite likely. But the public gave us their response. They voted for Fine Gael, whom said any property tax was unfair. They voted Fine Gael because they would immediately, they said, overturn the promissory note deal. They voted Fine Gael because they would get retrospective capitalisation of the banks. They voted Fine Gael because they would overhaul the Troika memos of understanding. They voted Fine Gael because of the 5-point plan. And they voted Labour because bondholders would be burned. They voted Labour because frontline workers would be protected. They voted Labour because education fees wouldn't be raised. And they voted Fine Gael and Labour because they were promised an easier way, a softer way. The closing of the income and expenditure gap would be difficult, but it wouldn't be painful. And you won the election, fair and square, and achieved a massive majority. 2 years later, you now come to realise, of course, that not only, yes, it has been painful. Painful for you, painful for your parties, painful for your supporters. But for the electorate, it hasn't just been painful. Many would say it's been torturous. Yes, the gap has been closed further. Yes, the promissory note deal has come 2 years later. There has been no retrospective capitalisation of banks yet. The 5-point plan is now a one-hit wonder. As I said, credit unions and their bondholders have been burned. Local authority bondholders have been burned. Education fees have been raised. The poor in society then are now in poverty. The weak and the disabled have been let down. Ford got a walkover from Labour. And now today, what Enda Kenny said was unfair. What Enda Kenny said was unjust. What Enda Kenny said was illegal is now about to be enshrined in law and enforced by the Revenue Commissioners. Our commitment on a residential site tax was not predicated on there being no growth or negative growth. It wasn't predicated on the level of negative equity that exists in society today. It wasn't predicated on a mortgage arrears crisis. And it wasn't predicated on there having to be an insufficient insolvency bill that enforces the will and the veto of the banks. The Troika reluctantly accepted this from us and other opposition parties. But they congratulate the government parties who plough on regardless with inequitable property tax and who disregard an inability to pay by fining them another 4%. They plough on regardless with water metering and charges in the absence of promised audit of networks, in the absence of promised audit of costs. And they plough on regardless, as we heard this week, with another charge on properties, in addition to this, in the form of a broadcasting charge on properties. And they plough on regardless with no regard for what is an archaic commercial rate system that supposedly funds local authorities. They plough on with lame excuses for inaction on upward-only rent reviews. They plough on blindly accepting the trickery of banks that they are lending. And it's against these backdrops that you expect growth, that you expect economic activity, and that you expect jobs to be created. The stark reality is that the promissory note deal will not ease any burden on families. Instead, this property tax will add to the huge burdens on families, will add to the huge burdens on the suffering and the sufferings that families are meeting every day of the week. And as regards the amendments proposed by the government today, yes, I welcome them. But they're a long way short of the demands that will be made by your backbenchers in a few weeks' time, when the revenue drop their demands in the hallways of Ireland. And it's only then, I'm afraid, that you and your parties and your government may realise, only then, that an alternative at this time should have at least been considered and ultimately sought. I don't enjoy making such a prediction. I wish I was wrong, and I wish people could afford this. And I wish our society was in the sort of shape that the Taoiseach tells his peers in Europe. And I sincerely hope, Minister Noonan, that you don't regret this. And I sincerely hope that the error and disregard is not your swan song.
Thank you, Deputy Cowan. Call now on Deputy Patrick Nulty. There are 12 minutes remaining in the slot.
Okay, thank you very much, Cathaoirleach, and I'm very glad to be able to speak on this piece of legislation today. Can I start off, I think, with some of the positives in the amending legislation, and I welcome the Minister and you're to be congratulated for making positive changes, particularly in relation to people who've had a housing adaptation grant. I think it's right and important that consideration was given to their situation, and also to people who are acting as executors, perhaps to a relative or close family member in a will, an exemption there, and also, importantly, a recognition of the position of people who are suffering from pyrite in their homes. And I think it's an absolute abdication of responsibility of this state over many years, initially in terms of the regulation and policing of building control and building regulations initially, but then with the foot dragging that occurred for pyrite infected homes, some of whom I know personally, some of whom's people's homes I've been in myself. And I think, subject to the criteria and regulations in terms of this policy's administration being published and examined in detail, I think it would be churlish for those of us who haven't been campaigning for that exemption not to acknowledge and to welcome those changes, and I wish to do so. However, I am struck by the changes that have been made in relation to personal insolvency, because To me, this seems somewhat like giving people an exemption when the horse has already bolted, when in actual fact people are already in very strenuous and difficult insolvency or debt settlement mechanisms and procedures. The point those of us who've been critical of this form of property tax have consistently made is that it will force more people into financial difficulty. It will force more people into mortgage arrears and into a situation where they are falling over a cliff in terms of their own finances. How can somebody who is already in mortgage arrears, who is already paying interest only on their mortgage, be asked to pay a property tax on what is called an asset, when in actual fact it is a liability because their mortgage is bigger than the commercial value of the property which they procured? That to me is economically irrational. And to say that you will get an exemption when in fact you're already in a dire financial situation and already been forced to enter into debt settlement arrangements, to me doesn't seem to grasp the argument that's being made, and certainly does nothing for people who are in mortgage arrears. And to pretend that it does, I think, is disingenuous. It's simply not the case. It's simply not the case in my view. Also, and I've listened to some of the earlier contributions in relation to this debate about how, you know, a property tax is progressive, about how those of us who make no bones about defining ourselves on the left in terms of political debate in Ireland should be cheerleaders for a property tax. Well, I have to disagree and reject that. Certainly, I support, and many of us support, a wealth tax, but that is extremely different from what is being proposed today, and which I will develop later, but the mechanism through which you are collecting the tax actually exposes that. Minister, shortly after you took office, in response to a parliamentary question in this House, and I'm sure you take the responses you give on the record extremely seriously and analyse them with diligence and rigour, you said that a wealth tax based on the model applied in France would bring in nearly €500 million a year. Fact. I'm assuming you stand over your response. I'm assuming you were correct when you said that and your department was correct. Now, we're not talking about some onerous imposition on those who create wealth. We are talking about fair taxation. We are talking about citizens contributing to their society based on their ability to pay. And so a moderate wealth tax of between 0.1 and 1% on financial assets, less mortgages and commercial liabilities, on the top of that over 800,000 or more on a gradual basis as a solidarity charge, I think is reasonable. Francois Hollande, when he took power, when he was given a mandate by the people of France, reversed Sarkozy's changes to their wealth tax. Other countries have introduced wealth taxes, and there is a growing drive across Europe for the introduction of wealth taxes, with, for example, the Labour Party in Britain, the Social Democratic Party in Germany and others looking very, very closely at this. And why would we not introduce a new moderate form of taxation to bring in 480 million a year to our exchequer? How many special needs teachers would that provide? How many hospital beds would it open? 480 million according to the Department of Finance, on the record. Why would we not consider that? What is the difficulty with that? The idea that every person with wealth would suddenly go on to airlingus.com and start booking flights to leave the country within the next 24 hours or the next week or so is farcical, because we're talking about financial assets, we're talking about shares, we're talking about commercial property. These are assets that can't simply be moved here and there. And that would be a much fairer way, Minister, to generate revenue. But it's not even been considered and not even been given due debate and discussion, in my view. Can I secondly say, in relation to the property tax, I believe that it will again hit domestic demand and hit domestic spending in our economy. I know of a small unit of shops, 5 units in an estate. 2 of those units closed their doors for the last time earlier this year. The January was as bad for them this year as it was in previous years of the crisis. And the reality is that is because people know property and water charges are coming down the line. It is impacting on consumer spending. It is killing domestic demand. And on top of that, we're taking jobs out of the public sector when we should be actually protecting and keeping people in employment to provide the services we need. So I profoundly disagree, Minister, with the economic thinking and the economic rationale that underlines your strategy. And, you know, you mentioned yesterday during the debate around your question time about the need to look at the supply side and to promote innovation and new technology, new products. Of course, that's welcome. But you have to have a demand, and people have to have the capacity to spend in their economy. And this property tax further undermines that, further dampens that, where an average home is going to be hit with a bill of 300, 400 euros, and then the water charges is waiting to come next down the line. And these were all public services provided for to people that people have a right to. They have a right to these things. They have a right to expect that their local authorities will clean the roads, will provide ramps in their estate if they need them, will provide clean water. And there was a local government fund there to provide for that, which was raided successfully by the last government and unfortunately by this government. So to pretend that this is new revenue is simply untrue. It is simply an accounting trick. It's my view that for every €100 that's raised to the property tax, 3/4 of that will be sucked out of the domestic economy. We have 180,000 mortgages in some form of distress or difficulty in this country. According to the central bank, more than 10% of private mortgages are in arrears for 90 days or more. And last September, there was some €16.8 billion of Irish mortgage arrears debt. Levying the property tax simply exacerbates that situation. And as I said before, asking those people who are already in arrears, already crippled, already unable to do a weekly shop because they're doing everything they can to pay the mortgage, how are they going to get the money? Nobody has provided an answer. Not one person who is a cheerleader for this tax has explained to people who are already in mortgage arrears how they're going to pay it. And the reason is that deep down, when they reflect on it, in their heart and soul, they know that the people who call to their clinics, the people who are being crushed by austerity in this country, in a myopic and disastrous economic strategy, will not have the money for this tax. And that is the truth of it. If you introduce new taxation measures on people on average and lower incomes in a depressed economy, all you do is depress the economy further, create a more divisive and fractured society. And when you look at the actual bottom line in terms of revenue gains as against revenue lost in other sectors of the economy, you don't even generate the funds you claim to do so at the start. Just in terms of what some people have said is the progressive case for a property tax. Well, it comes from the idea that you tax assets that accumulate wealth. Of course, I'm in favour of taxing assets. I'm in favour of people who are, for example, distorting the property market. And you can begin to see it now as property prices have collapsed. People are now coming in to buy property as an investment again, to bleed people dry who can't access their own home, who haven't been provided with social housing.
2 minutes remaining.
The corollary of that is that the state, through the Department of Social Protection, will then pay that rent to people through rent allowance. So our housing policy is in absolute crisis. We have 100,000 people on the waiting list, we're spending hundreds of millions on rent allowance, and now we're creating a situation where investors are now coming in to distort the market again, which I believe is completely wrong. In relation to people in local authority housing, it says that they'll be on the lowest level payment, about €90 a year. If this is a tax on an asset, what asset do I own if I'm a local authority tenant? I don't have an asset. I will return that property back at the end of my life. So there is no asset for them to be taxed on. So how is it a tax on their asset? It's simply irrational and illogical. And to impose another charge on them is another tax. And can I conclude on this, Cathaoirleach? The fact that the revenue commissioners are being given carte blanche to collect this tax through people's wages, through people's pay slips, is quite simply revealing the truth that this is just another tax on PAYE workers, on ordinary citizens and people, and that there is an ideological objection within Fine Gael to tax higher incomes. And that's why I can't support your government, because we have no common ground when it comes to our analysis. I respect your mandate and I respect that you act with sincerity, but I believe on the economy and on the future direction of our society, this tax and your analysis is profoundly wrong, and I will be opposing this measure. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. I now call on Deputy Brendan Ryan. I believe you're sharing time with Deputies Frank Feehan and Regina Doherty, and the time division is indicated at 5 minutes for yourself, 10 for Frank Feehan and 5 for Regina Doherty. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, Lascian Corla. Thank you, Lascian Corla. Minister, I welcome the opportunity to speak again on this bill, and once again my focus today is on the exemption for pyrite-affected properties. I welcome the intention to provide an exemption for a period of 3 years for residential properties that have been affected by pyrite, and these are mostly centred in my constituency of Dublin North. It represents yet another half step towards rectifying the pyrite crisis. However, I am asking for more than half steps. We need bigger leaps forward, Minister. This amendment bill provides for a methodology for assessing the assessment of residential properties and the testing of subfloor hardcore material to establish the presence of significant pyritic damage. In making this regulation, the Minister shall have regard to the new standards published by the National Standards Authority of Ireland. Firstly, I contend that these regulations are too restrictive for the purposes of allowing an exemption for this local property tax. These regulations mean that only those meeting the restrictive requirements of the red category from the Pyrite Panel's report will qualify for an exemption. Minister, it doesn't matter if a household is in the green, amber or red category. If the house has any level of pyrite, or if the house is in a pyrite-affected estate, it is effectively valueless as it is unsellable. Secondly, some homeowners have already paid for tests which have proved the presence of pyrite before these new standards were published. Those families need definitive assurances in this bill that their test results will stand to be valid for the purposes of the exemption. Thirdly, in my experience, the majority of homeowners are unable to afford the tests. They just do not have the money. These homeowners need some breathing space, Minister. The Pyrite Resolution Board is just beginning its work, and it will be administering a fund for pyritic remediation. This fund, I am lobbying for money to be set aside for hard-pressed families to pay for testing as well as the remediation process itself. Many homeowners know they have pyrite and the adverse effects are so obvious, but they simply cannot afford the few €1,000 required to get the test done. If these homeowners were given the exemption, it would allow enough space for the Pyrite Resolution Board to assist with testing costs, which would, in almost all suspected cases, I believe, prove the presence of significant pyritic damage. We know where the estates are, Minister, from the work of the Pyrite Panel. If you are free any time, Minister, we can go for a drive to North County Dublin and we can visit the estates and individual homes affected. In the overall picture, at a national level, the number of houses and estates affected is quite small. As you have said yourself, Minister, we are exceeding our budgetary targets as set by the Troika, and due to the negotiation skills of yourself and other government ministers, we have renegotiated the promissory notes and have given ourselves €1 billion worth of budgetary breathing space. We have enough space to relax the exemption requirements for pyrite-affected householders and estates to ensure all those affected can avail of this exemption. Time limiting the exemption, you are ensuring all actors, especially the Pyrite Resolution Board, act in an expedient manner to assist householders to rectify their homes. And this is indeed what is required at this time. I believe this is the fairest thing to do, and I would ask that this bill be amended accordingly. I urge you, Minister, to put yourself in the shoes of the pyrite-affected homeowners and bring back an amendment to the effect that all houses in non-remediated pyrite-affected housing estates will be exempt from the property tax. There is no market for such houses until they are remediated and certified as being pyrite-free, then they have zero value. But the legislation does not allow for self-valuation at zero level. Minister, there is general goodwill towards the government in its efforts to deal with the pyrite crisis, and you can build on that goodwill with a positive response on this matter today. The lost revenue for such a response would be quite minuscule and only for a limited period of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy. Excuse me. Deputy Regina Doherty.
Thank you, Caroline.
Actually, there's 15 minutes remaining in the slot, and I've no other
Sure, Deputy Dean will
indications,
come
so
along to save
you're
me.
not in a hurry.
I will be brief because I only want to talk about two different sections of it. One that's not in the bill, Minister, and I did mention this before. It's with regard to recognising the very large majority of people who paid vast amounts of stamp duty over the last 10 years. And I appreciate from correspondence that we've had that the expert report, devised the property tax around the ability to pay. But I think,